The post disappeared within minutes, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots circulated. The speculation intensified. The second major paternity claimant was Mark Lester, a British actor famous for playing the title role in the 1968 film Oliver. Lester had been friends with Michael Jackson for decades. He was named godfather to all three of Michael's children. And in 2009, shortly after Michael's death, Lester went public with an explosive claim. He said he had donated sperm to Michael Jackson so the singer could have children. He said he believed Paris Jackson was his biological daughter. He pointed to the striking resemblance between Paris and his own daughter Harriet. The same blonde hair. The same delicate features. The same blue eyes. Lester's claim was both specific and vague. He said he donated sperm. He believed it was used. But he admitted he had no proof, no documentation, no confirmation that his sperm had actually been used to conceive any of Michael's children. It was belief based on physical resemblance and the knowledge that he had made sperm donation at Michael's request. When asked why Michael would have needed his sperm, Lester suggested that Michael might have been unable to father children himself. Whether due to medical issues, medications, or other factors, Michael allegedly sought help from friends to achieve his dream of fatherhood. Legal experts pointed out that even if Lester's claims were true, he had no legal rights. California law is clear. Children born to a married couple are legally the children of that couple. Michael was married to Debbie Rowe when Prince and Paris were conceived and born. Therefore, legally, Michael Jackson was their father. End of story. Lester would have to wait until Paris turned 18 and convince her to voluntarily take a DNA test. Or somehow convince the Jackson family to agree to testing, which they had zero incentive to do. The Jackson family's position was simple and consistent. Michael Jackson was the father. These were his children. Anyone claiming otherwise was either delusional or seeking attention or money. But the questions wouldn't go away, especially when you looked at the children. Prince grew into a young man who looked nothing like Michael Jackson. Tall, with light hair, Caucasian features, no obvious Jackson family resemblance. Paris became a beautiful young woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a face that could have belonged to any white American family. There was no trace of Michael's genetics visible in either of them. And people noticed. It became a running joke, a source of endless speculation. Michael Jackson's white kids. How could the king of pop, a black man despite his vitiligo, have children who looked so completely Caucasian? Michael's defenders had explanations. Genetics are complex. Michael had vitiligo which destroyed his melanin. Maybe that affected his genetics in ways we don't understand. Debbie Rowe is very white. Maybe her genes were just dominant. Mixed-race children can look more like one parent than the other. All of these explanations had some scientific basis. But they required ignoring the obvious. They required accepting a highly unlikely genetic outcome ×2. Both children looking completely white. Neither showing any clear evidence of African American heritage. It strained credibility. And then there was Blanket. Prince Michael Jackson II, born February 21, 2002. Michael's third and final child. This pregnancy and birth were even more mysterious than the first two. There was no mother figure. No wife or girlfriend. Michael announced that he had used a surrogate, a woman whose identity would be kept permanently secret. He never revealed who she was. Not to the public, not reportedly even to his own family. Blanket's mother remains unknown to this day. And Blanket himself, who now goes by the name Bigi, has features that look more obviously mixed race than his older siblings. Darker hair. Slightly darker skin tone. Features that could plausibly suggest African American heritage. Was Blanket actually Michael's biological son? The speculation ran both directions. Some believed that Blanket looked more like Michael than the other two children, suggesting he might be the only one who was actually biologically related to the king of pop. Others pointed out that Blanket's features still didn't match Michael's very closely, suggesting that perhaps all three children were the products of sperm donors and surrogate arrangements. 3 children. Possibly 2 different sperm donors providing the biological material. Arnold Klein for Prince and Paris. Someone else, perhaps even Michael himself, for Blanket. Or Mark Lester for all 3. Or some combination nobody could definitively prove. Michael's parenting style added to the mystery rather than resolving it. He was simultaneously an incredibly devoted father and someone who seemed to be hiding his children from the world. The masks and veils they wore in public were explained as protection from paparazzi. But they also served to hide the children's faces, to prevent close examination of their features, to make it harder for people to analyze whether they looked like Michael or someone else. When Michael did allow his children to be photographed without masks, it was usually in carefully controlled settings where their appearance could be managed and the narrative controlled. The most famous incident involving Blanket came in November 2002, when Michael dangled his infant son over a balcony railing at a Berlin hotel while fans gathered below. The baby's face was covered with a blanket, which is how he got his nickname. Michael held him out over the railing, several stories above the ground, dangling him briefly before pulling him back. The incident sparked global outrage. What kind of father would do that? Child Protective Services investigated. Michael later apologized, saying he got caught up in the moment and made a terrible mistake. But the image of Blanket dangling over that railing became one of the defining images of Michael's increasingly erratic behavior in his final years. By the mid-2000s, Michael Jackson's life was spiraling. His career was struggling. His finances were disastrous despite decades of massive success. He was facing criminal charges for child molestation in the case that would go to trial in 2005 and result in his acquittal but destroy what remained of his reputation. His addiction to prescription painkillers was worsening. His plastic surgery had transformed his face into something barely recognizable as human. And through it all, he clung to his children. They were his anchors, his reason for living, his innocence in a life that had lost all innocence decades earlier. Prince, Paris, and Blanket grew up in a bizarre environment. They lived at Neverland Ranch, Michael's massive estate with its amusement park rides, zoo animals, and fantasy atmosphere. They were homeschooled, isolated from other children except for carefully selected playmates. They were raised by nannies and staff while Michael disappeared for days or weeks at a time, either on business trips or lost in his addiction and mental health struggles. They called him Daddy and loved him fiercely, but they didn't have a normal father-child relationship. How could they? Michael Jackson wasn't capable of providing normal anything. Did the children know about the paternity questions? Did Michael ever sit them down and explain that he might not be their biological father but he was their father in all the ways that mattered? Or did he maintain the fiction completely, never acknowledging any ambiguity, insisting to them and everyone else that they were his biological children? We don't know. The children have spoken very little about this topic over the years. When Paris did address it publicly, she was defiant and angry. "Michael Jackson is my father," she declared. "He will always be my father. He raised me. He loved me. That's what matters." But notice what Paris didn't say. She didn't say, "Michael Jackson is my biological father." She didn't reference genetics or DNA. She talked about raising and loving, the social and emotional bonds of fatherhood rather than the biological ones. It was an artful statement that confirmed their relationship while leaving the biological question unanswered. Whether that ambiguity was intentional or simply reflected Paris's own uncertainty, we can only speculate. June 25, 2009, changed everything. Michael Jackson died at his rented mansion in Los Angeles at age 50. The official cause was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drugs that killed the king of pop. Michael died preparing for a comeback tour that he desperately needed financially but physically couldn't handle. He died owing hundreds of millions of dollars. He died addicted, broken, and alone except for the doctor who was killing him. Prince was 12 years old. Paris was 11. Blanket was 7. They lost their father, or the man they knew as their father, the only parent who had been consistently present in their lives. The trauma was immense and immediate and visible to the world when they appeared at Michael's memorial service, crying and devastated. Paris spoke briefly, saying, "Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine." Her voice broke. The world watched 3 children grieve. And almost immediately the vultures circled. Within days of Michael's death, the paternity claims exploded. Mark Lester went public with his sperm donor story. Dr. Arnold Klein started dropping cryptic hints. Tabloids published countless stories analyzing the children's appearances and questioning their genetics. The Jackson family closed ranks, insisting Michael was the father and threatening legal action against anyone who claimed otherwise. Custody of the 3 children was awarded to Katherine Jackson, Michael's mother. Debbie Rowe initially challenged for custody but ultimately reached an agreement for limited visitation rights rather than taking the children away from the only family they had known. And then the estate battles began. Michael's will left his fortune to his mother Katherine, his children, and various charities. But determining the value of that estate became enormously complicated. Michael died massively in debt, owing hundreds of millions of dollars to various creditors. The Neverland Ranch was in foreclosure. He owed his record label. He had borrowed against his most valuable asset, his 50% stake in the Sony/ATV music publishing catalog that included the Beatles songs. On paper, Michael Jackson died broke. But the executors of his estate, lawyer John Branca and music executive John McClane, saw potential that Michael himself had squandered in his final chaotic years. They got to work rebuilding the Jackson brand. Within months of Michael's death, they released This Is It, a documentary built from rehearsal footage for the concerts Michael would never perform. The film grossed over $260 million worldwide. Then came posthumous album releases, carefully curated to maximize sales. Licensing deals for Michael Jackson merchandise, video games, tribute shows, and intellectual property. The Cirque du Soleil created not one but multiple Michael Jackson shows that toured the world and generated hundreds of millions in revenue. Within 5 years of his death, Michael Jackson's estate had gone from bankruptcy to earning more annually than Michael had earned at the peak of his living career. By 2016, Forbes estimated the estate had generated over $2 billion since Michael's death. And Prince, Paris, and Blanket stood to inherit hundreds of millions each when they reached adulthood. The will specified that Katherine Jackson would receive 40% of the estate during her lifetime, with the children splitting another 40%, and the remaining 20% going to charities. When Katherine died, her share would also go to the children. We're talking about a fortune that would make each of Michael Jackson's 3 children worth potentially $500 million or more. That's the kind of money that makes paternity questions extremely relevant. That's the kind of inheritance that makes DNA tests explosive rather than merely interesting. But here's the legal reality that protected Prince, Paris, and Blanket from losing that inheritance even if they weren't Michael's biological children. Michael Jackson's will specifically named them. He identified them as his children. Under California law, that's what matters. A will is a legal document that distributes assets according to the deceased person's wishes. If Michael wanted these 3 children to inherit his fortune, whether or not they were biologically his, that was his right. Nobody could challenge their inheritance without proving the will was fraudulent or that Michael was incompetent when he signed it. And there was zero evidence of either. The will was properly executed, witnessed, and filed. These were Michael Jackson's legal children, and no DNA test could change that fact. Mark Lester understood this. That's why his paternity claims in 2009 and subsequent years never included demands for a share of Michael's estate. Lester claimed emotional connection, not financial rights. He said he wanted a relationship with the children, particularly Paris, whom he believed was his biological daughter. But he had no legal standing. Even if DNA tests proved he was the sperm donor, he would have no parental rights because he hadn't raised the children, wasn't named on their birth certificates, and wasn't recognized in Michael's will. California law is very clear on this point. Sperm donors, even known sperm donors who donate to friends rather than through official channels, have no parental rights or responsibilities unless specifically established through legal agreements. Dr. Arnold Klein was in a similar position. After Michael's death, Klein's financial situation deteriorated dramatically. He owed millions in back taxes. His medical practice was struggling. He filed for bankruptcy in 2011. He died in 2015 at age 70, his reputation damaged and his finances destroyed. In his final years, Klein continued to drop hints about being the biological father of Prince and Paris, but he never pursued any legal action. Why not? Perhaps because he had no case. Perhaps because challenging the children's paternity would have invited scrutiny of his relationship with Michael and Debbie Rowe that might have revealed unethical medical practices or other legally problematic behaviors. Or perhaps because he knew, as Lester knew, that even if he could prove biological paternity, it wouldn't give him any rights to the children or the fortune. But the most interesting paternity story wasn't about Prince or Paris. It was about Blanket. Because while Prince and Paris looked obviously Caucasian, raising immediate questions about Michael being their biological father, Blanket looked different. He had darker hair, slightly darker skin, features that were at least plausibly mixed race. Some observers believed Blanket actually looked like Michael in ways his older siblings didn't. The shape of his eyes, the structure of his face, subtle resemblances that suggested biological connection. This led to fascinating speculation. If Blanket was Michael's biological son and Prince and Paris weren't, what did that tell us about Michael's fertility and his choices? Some theorized that Michael had medical issues that made it difficult or impossible for him to father children in the late 1990s when Prince and Paris were conceived. Perhaps cancer treatment, as some rumors suggested. Perhaps the effects of vitiligo medications. Perhaps complications from his various other health issues and prescription drug dependencies. So he used sperm donors for the first two children, whether Klein or Lester or someone else entirely. But then something changed. Perhaps his health improved. Perhaps medical intervention addressed whatever fertility issues existed. Perhaps he found a surrogate who could carry a child conceived with his own sperm. And in 2002, Blanket was born, Michael's actual biological son, where the first two had been genetic imposters. This theory explained why Blanket's mother's identity was kept even more secret than Debbie Rowe's involvement with the first two children. If Blanket was the only one who was really Michael's, then protecting his unique status became paramount. The surrogate had to remain completely anonymous to maintain the fiction that all three children were equal, all three were Michael's, all three had the same claim to his legacy. But there was another, darker theory about Blanket that circulated in the years after Michael's death. This theory suggested that Blanket wasn't Michael's biological son either. That in fact, Michael Jackson was infertile or otherwise unable to father children, and all three kids were the products of sperm donors and surrogates. But while Prince and Paris were conceived using one donor, probably Dr. Arnold Klein, given his relationship with Debbie Rowe and his physical proximity to the process, Blanket was conceived using a different donor. Perhaps someone with more obvious mixed-race features. Perhaps someone Michael specifically chose to create a child who would look more like him, solving the public relations problem of having white-looking children when you're supposed to be African American. This theory suggested Michael deliberately sought out a sperm donor with the right physical characteristics. Someone with the darker coloring, the features that would create a child who looked plausibly like Michael's biological offspring. It was cynical and manipulative, treating children as genetic experiments and public image management. But it fit with Michael's documented obsession with control, his history of plastic surgery to transform his own appearance, his complex racial identity issues. If Michael couldn't father his own children, he might have tried to create children who at least looked like they could be his, eliminating the questions that plagued Prince and Paris from birth. The children themselves grew up under this cloud of speculation. Imagine being Prince or Paris or Blanket, scrolling through social media or Googling your own name, and constantly seeing articles and comments questioning whether Michael Jackson was really your father. Every photo analyzed. Every facial feature dissected. Random internet strangers declaring with certainty that you're not who you think you are, that your entire identity is a lie, that you're frauds living off a dead man's legacy. The psychological damage of that constant scrutiny is impossible to quantify but undoubtedly immense. Paris Jackson struggled the most visibly. As a teenager, she began acting out. Her social media posts became increasingly erratic. She was hospitalized after a reported suicide attempt in 2013, when she was just 15 years old. Reports suggested she had cut her wrists and taken pills, driven by depression and the overwhelming pressure of being Michael Jackson's daughter. Or not being Michael Jackson's daughter. The uncertainty itself was toxic. Paris couldn't escape the speculation. Every interview, every public appearance, somebody would ask about her father or make comments about her appearance not matching his. In the years after her suicide attempt, Paris opened up about her struggles. She talked about being sexually assaulted as a teenager. About suffering from depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. About multiple suicide attempts, not just the one that became public. About self-harm and drug use and feeling completely lost and broken. She credited her brothers with saving her life, particularly Prince, who found her after one suicide attempt and got her emergency help. The bond between the three siblings became their lifeline. They were the only people who truly understood what it was like to be Michael Jackson's children, whatever that meant biologically. Paris also began to rebel against the Jackson family's control. She got tattoos, lots of them, including multiple tributes to her father. She posed nude for magazines. She pursued acting and modeling careers that put her body and face in front of cameras constantly, the opposite of how Michael had hidden his children behind masks. She dated publicly, including women, coming out as bisexual. She seemed determined to live life on her own terms, refusing to be controlled by the Jackson family's expectations or public opinion about who she should be. And she spoke defiantly about her father. In interviews, Paris insisted that Michael Jackson was her father in every way that mattered. She acknowledged knowing what people said about her appearance and about paternity questions. She said she didn't care. "He's my father," she declared repeatedly. "You can say whatever you want. I know what I know. You raised me. You loved me. That's what makes someone a father." It was a mature, thoughtful response from someone who had spent her entire life dealing with speculation about her own identity. But Paris was careful if you listen closely. She never said, "He's my biological father." She never referenced genetics or DNA. She always talked about the emotional, social, and legal bonds of fatherhood rather than biological ones. Was this because she knew the truth and was artfully avoiding directly lying? Or was it because she genuinely didn't know and was defining fatherhood in the only terms that made sense to her given the ambiguity? We can only speculate. Prince took a different path. He stayed more private, avoiding the spotlight that his sister seemed to seek out. He went to college, studying business at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He launched a charitable foundation in his father's name, focusing on helping young people. He gave occasional interviews but mostly kept his personal life private. When asked about paternity questions, Prince's response was similar to Paris's but even more brief. Michael Jackson is my father. Next question. He refused to engage with the speculation, shut it down immediately, and moved on. Prince also posted that cryptic photo of himself next to Dr. Arnold Klein, the one with the caption, that he quickly deleted. What was he thinking? Was he seeing his own face in Klein's features? Was he questioning his own paternity, wondering if the man who had raised him was actually his biological father? Or was he trolling the media, knowing the speculation would explode and maybe enjoying his ability to control that narrative for a moment? The post was deleted so quickly that Prince never explained it. But once something is on the internet, it never truly disappears. Screenshots circulated for years, analyzed and reanalyzed by people looking for hidden meanings. Blanket, the youngest, took yet another path. As he entered his teenage years, he asked to be called Bigi instead of Blanket. The nickname that came from his father dangling him over that Berlin balcony had become a burden rather than a term of endearment. Bigi Jackson kept an even lower profile than his siblings. He avoided social media almost entirely. He rarely gave interviews. He focused on school and stayed out of the tabloid drama that seemed to follow Prince and especially Paris. But Bigi's appearance continued to fuel speculation. As he grew into a young man, some observers thought they could see Michael in his features. The eyes especially. The shape of his face. Not a perfect resemblance, but enough to suggest possible biological connection. This made Bigi's paternity the biggest question mark of all three children. If you believe the theory that Michael couldn't father children and use sperm donors for all three kids, then Bigi was just another product of that arrangement. But if you believed Michael had fertility that was inconsistent or improved over time, then Bigi might be the only one who was actually biologically Michael's son. There was never any public DNA test to settle the question. The Jackson family made sure of that. Katherine Jackson, as guardian of the children during their minority, had the legal authority to consent to or refuse DNA testing. She refused. Absolutely, completely, without any ambiguity. No DNA test. The children were Michael's. Anyone who claimed otherwise was trying to hurt the family or scam money or gain attention. The Jackson family closed ranks around Prince, Paris, and Bigi, protecting them from legal challenges to their paternity and therefore their inheritance. But private DNA tests? Tests done without the Jackson family's knowledge or cooperation. That's where things get murky and allegations get explosive. Multiple sources have claimed over the years that DNA testing was done secretly, using biological samples obtained through various means. A toothbrush taken from garbage. A used drinking glass. Hair collected by someone with access to the children. If you believe these claims, and they're difficult to verify independently, then multiple DNA tests have been conducted over the years without the children's knowledge or consent. And according to these alleged secret tests, the results are exactly what you would expect from looking at the children. Prince and Paris show no biological connection to Michael Jackson. Their DNA matches neither Michael's known genetic profile nor the genetic markers you would expect from someone with his African American heritage. The tests allegedly suggest Arnold Klein as the biological father, matching Klein's Caucasian Jewish ancestry. But again, these claims are difficult to verify. They come from tabloid reports, anonymous sources, and people with potential financial interests in creating sensational stories. Without official confirmation, without public DNA results from verified laboratories, it's impossible to know what's true and what's fabrication. For Bigi, the alleged secret DNA results are more ambiguous. Some reports claim he too shows no biological connection to Michael. Others suggest there's partial matching that could indicate biological relationship. The variance in claims might reflect different tests conducted at different times using different samples with different degrees of reliability. Or it might reflect the fact that people are making up stories, throwing out speculation and presenting it as fact because there's money to be made in sensational revelations about Michael Jackson's children. What we know for absolute certain is this. Legally, Prince, Paris, and Bigi are Michael Jackson's children. Their birth certificates say so. His will says so. Catherine Jackson's legal guardianship confirmed it. The probate court that handled Michael's estate recognized them as his legal heirs. No court has ever ruled otherwise. No official DNA test has been publicly released that contradicts their legal status. Everything else is speculation, allegation, rumor, and tabloid fodder. But legal certainty doesn't equal biological certainty. And that ambiguity has shaped these three lives in profound ways. Think about what it means to grow up never quite knowing if the man you call father was actually your biological father. Think about strangers constantly telling you that you don't look like him, that you can't possibly be his, that you're lying or being lied to about your own identity. Think about inheriting hundreds of millions of dollars while part of the world believes you don't deserve it because you're not really his child. Think about loving someone as your father, grieving his death, honoring his legacy, while always having that small voice in the back of your mind wondering if the connection was real or constructed. That's the reality Prince, Paris, and Bigi have lived since Michael died in 2009. They lost their father when they were still children. They grew up in the custody of their grandmother Catherine, surrounded by the extended Jackson family with all its drama and dysfunction. They watched from the sidelines as their father's estate generated billions of dollars. They saw tributes and documentaries and investigations into their father's life, including the horrific allegations of child sexual abuse that resurfaced in the 2019 documentary, Leaving Neverland. They had to defend their father's reputation while dealing with their own trauma and identity questions. The Leaving Neverland documentary was particularly devastating for Michael's children. The film featured detailed allegations from two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who claimed Michael had sexually abused them as children over a period of years. The allegations were graphic and disturbing. The documentary was watched by millions. And it reignited the controversy about Michael Jackson's relationship with children, a controversy that had plagued him since the first child molestation accusations in 1993 and nearly destroyed him during his 2005 criminal trial. Paris Jackson, particularly, defended her father fiercely against the allegations in Leaving Neverland. She called the accusers liars. She said her father had been innocent, that he loved children in a pure, non-sexual way, that he was being victimized posthumously by people seeking money and attention. She pointed out that both Robson and Safechuck had defended Michael under oath during his 2005 trial, testifying that he had never touched them inappropriately. Their stories had changed only after Michael died and could no longer defend himself. Only after they could sue his estate for millions of dollars. Paris saw it as exploitation and desecration of her father's memory. But here's the terrible irony. Paris was defending a man who might not have been her biological father. She was fighting for the reputation of someone who might have lied to her about her own identity. If Michael Jackson used sperm donors to father Prince and Paris, then their entire relationship was built on a fundamental deception. He let them believe he was their biological father when he wasn't. He allowed them to carry the burden of being Michael Jackson's children, with all the scrutiny and pressure that entailed, without giving them the truth about their own genetics. Was that cruelty or compassion? Michael could have told them. When they were old enough to understand, he could have sat them down and explained that he'd used sperm donors to have children, that he loved them no less for not sharing his DNA, that family is about love rather than genetics. But he apparently never did. He maintained the fiction, if it was fiction, all the way to his death. He left them to discover the truth, if it is the truth, from tabloids and DNA tests and internet speculation rather than from him. Prince, Paris, and Bigi are now all adults. Prince is in his late 20s. Paris is in her mid-20s. Bigi is in his early 20s. They've each come into their portions of Michael's estate. They're wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. They have opportunities and resources that come from being Michael Jackson's children, legally if not biologically. They can pursue whatever careers interest them. They have security for life. They're set. But are they whole? Paris's multiple suicide attempts suggest not. Prince's obsessive privacy suggests someone protecting himself from further pain. Bigi's almost complete disappearance from public life suggests someone who wants nothing to do with the circus that surrounds the Jackson name. These are three young people dealing with extraordinary trauma. They lost their father at crucial developmental stages. They grew up with constant speculation about their identity. They faced allegations that the man who raised them was a pedophile. They inherited a fortune built partially on music and partially on exploitation of their father's death. They carry a famous name that comes with impossible expectations and toxic baggage. And they've never gotten definitive answers about their paternity. Catherine Jackson protected them from DNA testing when they were minors. But now they're adults. They could take DNA tests themselves if they wanted. They could know for certain whether Michael was their biological father. Prince could compare his DNA to Arnold Klein's known genetic profile. Paris could test against Mark Lester, who has repeatedly said he'd be willing to provide DNA. Bigi could find out definitively whether he shares Michael's genetics. But they haven't. None of them have publicly taken DNA tests or released results. Why not? Perhaps because they don't want to know. Perhaps because knowing wouldn't change anything that matters. Michael Jackson raised them. He's the only father they remember. Whether or not they share his DNA doesn't alter the relationship they had with him or the grief they feel at his loss. DNA is just molecules. Fatherhood is about presence and love and sacrifice and teaching and protecting. By that definition, Michael was their father regardless of biology. Or perhaps they have taken DNA tests privately and decided not to release the results. Perhaps they know the truth and have chosen to keep it to themselves. It's their right. Nobody is entitled to know someone else's genetic information. The public fascination with their paternity is intrusive and dehumanizing. Prince, Paris, and Bigi are people, not puzzles to solve or curiosities to satisfy. If they know their biological origins and choose not to share that information, that's their business and nobody else's. But the speculation will never end as long as the question remains unanswered. Every photo of Paris will generate comments about how she doesn't look like Michael. Every rare public appearance by Prince or Bigi will be analyzed for Jackson family resemblances or lack thereof. The tabloids will continue to publish stories claiming secret DNA tests and explosive revelations. Mark Lester will probably continue to claim he's the biological father until he dies. And a new generation of internet commentators who weren't even alive when Michael died will dissect the Jackson family genetics, convinced they can solve the mystery through photo analysis and speculation. The broader questions raised by this story go beyond Michael Jackson and his 3 children. What does it mean to be a father? Is biology destiny or is family something we choose and create? If Michael Jackson used sperm donors to have children, was that wrong? He desperately wanted to be a father. Medical issues, whether real or perceived, might have made natural conception impossible or unlikely. Using sperm donors gave him the family he craved. Does it matter that he wasn't honest about it? Does it matter that Prince, Paris, and Bigi might have grown up believing a lie about their own identity? There are no easy answers. We live in an era when assisted reproduction is increasingly common and increasingly complex. Sperm donors, egg donors, surrogates, IVF, genetic testing. Children are conceived and born through methods that would have seemed like science fiction a generation ago. But the technology has outpaced our cultural and emotional understanding of what these methods mean for family identity and parent-child relationships. We're still figuring out how to talk about these issues, how to be honest with children about their origins, how to value both biological connection and chosen family bonds. Michael Jackson's situation was unique because of his fame and the fortune at stake. But the core questions apply to thousands of families dealing with similar issues away from public scrutiny. How do you tell a child they were conceived using a sperm donor? At what age do you have that conversation? Do you track down the donor so the child can meet their biological father? Or do you emphasize that the man who raised them is their real father regardless of genetics? These are difficult questions without clear right answers. For Prince, Paris, and Bigi, the difficulty is compounded by the public nature of their situation. They can't work through their identity questions privately. Everything happens in the glare of media attention and public speculation. When Paris got those tattoos honoring her father, people commented on whether she should be honoring someone who might not be her biological father. When Prince started his charity, people questioned whether he had the right to use the Jackson name if he wasn't really a Jackson. When Bigi tried to live quietly and privately, people wondered why he was hiding and what he was trying to avoid. The cruelty of public scrutiny can't be overstated. These are 3 young people who lost their father as children. They deserve compassion and privacy. Instead, they get constant invasive speculation about their genetics. They get tabloid stories claiming secret DNA tests. They get social media comments calling them frauds and gold diggers. They get conspiracy theories suggesting Michael kidnapped them or bought them or wasn't even dead but in hiding somewhere. The insanity never stops because Michael Jackson was so famous that everything connected to him becomes public property in the court of public opinion. And here's the darkest possibility that nobody wants to acknowledge. What if Michael Jackson's obsession with children, his need to surround himself with young boys, his bizarre relationships that led to multiple allegations of sexual abuse, what if that was all connected to his own inability to father biological children? What if he felt inadequate and broken because he couldn't create life naturally? What if his arrested development and his identification with childhood innocence was compensation for feeling like he'd failed at the most basic biological function? What if the paternity questions about his 3 children are the key to understanding his entire tragic psychology? That's speculative and potentially unfair. Mental health is complex. Child sexual abuse allegations are serious and shouldn't be reduced to psychological explanations. But Michael Jackson was a deeply damaged person with a traumatic childhood, a distorted sense of reality, and behaviors that were at minimum inappropriate and at worst criminal. Understanding his psychology matters. And his relationship with fatherhood and children is clearly central to that understanding. Whether Prince, Paris, and Bigi are his biological children might also help us understand Michael's final years. He was preparing for the This Is It concerts when he died. He was desperately in debt. He needed the money from those shows to save Neverland Ranch from foreclosure and pay off the hundreds of millions he owed. But he was physically incapable of performing. His health was destroyed by decades of plastic surgery, prescription drug abuse, and eating disorders. He was a skeleton of his former self. The rehearsal footage showed someone going through the motions but lacking the energy and ability that had made him the king of pop. Why was Michael doing those concerts when he clearly couldn't handle them? The obvious answer is financial desperation. But there's another possibility. What if he was doing it for his children? What if he knew they weren't biologically his and felt guilt about that? What if he was trying to rebuild his fortune and his legacy so he could leave them something substantial, so they would be financially secure and remember him as someone who provided for them even if he hadn't created them biologically? The This Is It concerts might have been Michael's final sacrifice for his children, literally working himself to death to ensure their future. Dr. Conrad Murray, the physician convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drugs that killed Michael, later claimed that Michael was obsessed with his children in his final months. He talked about them constantly. He worried about their future. He wanted to be sure they would be taken care of if anything happened to him. Murray's testimony is questionable given his conviction and his obvious motivation to paint Michael sympathetically. But if true, it suggests Michael knew he was dying or at least suspected his final concert tour might kill him. And he was making peace with that because he needed to provide for Prince, Paris, and Blanket. In death, Michael Jackson achieved something he never managed in life. He became profitable again. His estate generates more annually than he earned at his peak. His children will inherit hundreds of millions each. Whatever questions exist about their biological paternity, Michael accomplished his goal of providing for them financially. The tragedy is that he had to die to do it. If he'd lived, if he'd gotten proper medical care and psychological help and stayed away from enablers like Conrad Murray, he might have been there to raise his children into adulthood. They might have had a father instead of a fortune. But that's not what happened. Michael died alone in a rented mansion, pumped full of propofol, chasing sleep that wouldn't come naturally anymore. His children woke up on June 25, 2009, and their world ended. Everything after that has been trying to make sense of loss that can never truly make sense. And the paternity questions, the DNA speculation, the tabloid stories, all of that is just noise compared to the central truth. 3 children lost their father. Whether he was their biological father or the man who raised them with love and intention, they lost him. And that loss shaped them in ways that money can never repair and DNA tests can never clarify. So what's the answer? Are Prince, Paris, and Bigi Michael Jackson's biological children? Probably not Prince and Paris, based on their appearance and the multiple claims from people who could know the truth. Possibly Bigi, whose appearance is more ambiguous and whose origins are more mysterious. But definitely, legally, emotionally, they are Michael Jackson's children. He named them. He raised them. He loved them. He left them everything. And when he died, they grieved as children grieve for fathers. That's real regardless of DNA. That's true regardless of who donated sperm or how they were conceived. The 3 children of Michael Jackson carry his name into the future. They manage his legacy. They defend his reputation. They honor his memory. And they live with questions that may never be fully answered. 2 alleged fathers. 3 children. 1 complicated, tragic truth. Michael Jackson wanted to be a father more than almost anything. He achieved that goal through whatever means necessary. And biology matters less than intention. DNA matters less than love. The king of pop created a family whether or not he created it genetically. And that family, broken and complicated and scrutinized beyond reason, survives him. Prince, Paris, and Bigi Jackson. Michael Jackson's children. In all the ways that matter most. Forever.